My uncle left me a storage unit instead of money. Inside it was something that changed everything. My Uncle Pete was, by every external measure, a failure. I say this not to be cruel. I say it because it was the consensus of every adult in my family for as long as I can remember. He was the younger brother who never settled down, who moved apartments every 2 years, who worked odd jobs, carpentry, delivery driving, occasional landscaping, and never held any of them for long, who showed up to family holidays with a bottle of wine and a story about something interesting he'd seen that week and left early. My father, Pete's older brother, was the opposite. Stable, established, a 30-year career in insurance. He loved Pete in the impatient way older siblings sometimes love younger ones who refuse to be what they expected. He worried about him. He helped him out, occasionally, financially, and he shook his head at family dinners when Pete wasn't there. Pete died 2 years ago. He was 61. A heart attack alone in his apartment in Tucson, Arizona. He had told no one he was having chest pains. That was Pete, managing things quietly, not wanting to be a burden. His estate was almost nothing. A used truck, some tools, a checking account with $412, and a storage unit. The storage unit came to me, specifically, his handwritten will. 2 pages, found in his desk drawer, left the storage unit to me by name. Everything else went to my father. The unit, Unit 33 at a facility in Tucson, went to me. I drove to Tucson 3 weeks after the funeral. I wasn't expecting much. I figured tools, maybe some furniture, things he hadn't wanted to throw away, but practical residue of a life lived simply. The unit was 10 by 15, climate-controlled, which surprised me. That cost extra, and Pete was careful with money. When I unlocked the rolling door and lifted it, I stood there for a moment. It was full of paintings, not stacked carelessly, wrapped carefully in craft paper and bubble wrap, labeled on the outside with a number and a date in Pete's handwriting, stacked methodically along both walls and across the back, maybe 60-70 pieces. Various sizes. Some large, 4 feet by 3. Some small, 8 by 10. I opened one. The painting inside was, and I say this as someone with no formal art education, extraordinary. A landscape. The Arizona desert, at what looked like early morning, the light coming sideways across red rock, a single saguaro in the middle distance, the kind of painting that makes you feel the temperature of the air in it. There was a small label on the back, in Pete's handwriting, a title, a date, and 2 initials. PM Pete's full name was Peter Michael Mallory. I opened another, and another. I spent 2 hours in that storage unit unwrapping paintings, all of them his, all of them dated, spanning roughly 30 years. All of them, to my entirely untrained eye, remarkably good. I called my father that evening from the parking lot. Pete painted. I said, "Silence." "Did you know?" I asked. "He mentioned it once," my father said slowly, "years ago. I thought he meant hobby painting, sunsets on canvas. I didn't ask. I had the paintings appraised. I found an appraiser who specialized in regional American art, Southwestern landscapes specifically, and I drove a selection of 12 pieces to her gallery in Phoenix. She looked at them for a long time without speaking. She asked me who had painted them. I told her. She looked them up. Pete had never shown under his full name, but he had sold work, it turned out, under the name P.M. Mallory through a small gallery in Santa Fe. She found records of 6 sales over 20 years, prices ranging from $4,000 to $11,000. "These are very good," she said. "This is a serious body of work. The technique is, he knew exactly what he was doing. Why didn't he show more?" The appraiser estimated the value of the collection, 68 paintings in total, at somewhere between $240,000 and $310,000. I sat in her gallery for a while after she told me that. I thought about Pete at family dinners, the bottle of wine, the stories about things he'd seen that week. My father shaking his head, the man they'd all written off as the one who never figured it out, had been, in a climate-controlled storage unit in Tucson, quietly building something extraordinary. For 30 years. Alone, without anyone's approval or attention or validation. Just making the work. I kept 12 of the paintings. The rest I sold through the Santa Fe Gallery over the following year. The proceeds went into a college fund for my kids. One painting hangs in my living room now. the desert at early morning, the sideways light, the single saguaro. My father came to visit last spring. He stood in front of it for a long time. He never told me, my father said finally. No, I said. Why didn't he tell me about what it means to make something for 30 years without asking anyone to witness it, without needing the approval of people who had already decided who you were? Maybe, I said, he didn't need you to know. He knew. That was enough. He just kept looking at the painting, and I let him look.
My real estate agent was showing my house to a buyer she was secretly working with. I caught her on her own camera. I want to explain something about selling a house before I tell you what happened. When you hire a real estate agent, you are placing a significant amount of trust in a single person. They know when your house is empty. They have the lockbox code. They know what you paid for it, what you owe on it, what you need to clear to break even. They negotiate on your behalf using information that you've shared with them in confidence. You are, for the duration of that transaction, largely dependent on them to represent your interests honestly. Most agents do this well. Mine did not. My name is Rachel. I was selling a 3-bedroom house in Charlotte, North Carolina. A divorce situation, not dramatic, just concluded, and the house needed to go. My agent was a woman named Sherry who had been recommended by a mutual acquaintance. She was polished, professional, responsive. She had a good track record in the neighborhood. I liked her. We listed the house in April. The market was active. Within 2 weeks, we had 3 showings. Sherry said the feedback was positive. We got one offer $12,000 below asking. Sherry advised me to counter at full asking price. The buyer walked. A second offer came in 6 weeks later. $15,000 below asking. Again, Sherry advised me to counter high. Again, the buyer walked. By August, 4 months in, no sale. I was frustrated. The carrying costs were real. The divorce proceedings needed the house resolved. I was starting to feel the pressure. And then a new offer came in. $31,000 below asking. The buyer's name was Terrence Webb. I didn't know him, but something about this offer felt different. Sherry's tone when she presented it was different. Less neutral, slightly persuasive. She said the market was softening. She said $31,000 below was within the range of reasonable given current conditions. She said I should seriously consider it. I said I'd think about it overnight. I did not, in fact, sleep. I spent the night thinking about the pattern. 2 offers, both walked, after I countered at Sherry's advice. 4 months of carrying costs that made me more desperate with each passing week. And now a low offer that Sherry was quietly pushing me toward. I pulled up the Ring doorbell footage from the past 4 months. We had a Ring camera at the front door. I had forgotten about it. Honestly, it had been there when I moved in. It recorded motion-triggered clips to a cloud account that I still had access to. I started going through the showing dates. The first 2 showings, normal. Sherry arriving with prospective buyers. 40 minutes inside, everyone leaving. The 3rd showing, different. Sherry arrived with a man I didn't recognize. They were inside for over an hour. When they came out, they stood on the porch for several minutes, talking, close together. The kind of conversation that doesn't look like agent and client. The kind that looks like collaboration. The man was Terrence Webb, the buyer who had just made the low offer. I looked at the clip 3 times. Then I looked at the other showing dates. Terrence Webb had been at 2 of the 4 showings, not listed as a buyer either time, listed in Sherry's notes to me as a client she was also showing the property to in one case, which I had thought nothing of at the time, and not mentioned at all in the other. I called a real estate attorney in the morning. She explained what I was likely looking at. Dual agency, representing both buyer and seller, is legal in North Carolina, but requires explicit written disclosure. I had signed no such disclosure. If Sherry was working with Terrence as a buyer, while simultaneously representing me as a seller, without disclosing that relationship, She was in violation of her fiduciary duty and potentially of state licensing regulations. Beyond that, a pattern of advising a seller to counter high on legitimate offers, running out the clock on the listing, then presenting a low offer from a buyer she was secretly working with, had a name. It wasn't a nice name. I declined the offer, in writing, through the attorney. I also terminated Sherry's contract for cause, citing the undisclosed relationship. I filed a complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. I hired a new agent. The house went back on the market. 2 weeks later, it sold at $4,000 above my original asking price to a completely unrelated buyer who had been looking in the neighborhood for months. The Real Estate Commission investigation took 8 months. I provided the ring footage, the offer timeline, and documentation of Sherry's showings and correspondence. Sherry's license was suspended for 18 months. She was fined and required to complete ethics training as a condition of reinstatement. I don't know what happened to Terrence Webb. I assume he found another house eventually, through an agent who wasn't manipulating the seller on his behalf. Or maybe through the same methods. Some patterns don't stop just because one instance gets caught. What I know is this: I almost signed that contract. I was 4 months exhausted and financially pressured and ready to just end it, take the loss, and be done. A forgotten camera saved me $300,000. I still have Ring on the house I live in now. I check the footage more often than I need to. Old habit, new principle.
I spent 10 years thinking I had ruined someone's life. Then I found out the truth. I've been carrying this for 10 years, and I need to put it down somewhere. So here it is. When I was 24, I made a report. I was working at a financial services firm in Boston. Entry-level position. I had been there 8 months. My direct supervisor was a man named Leonard Graves, 50-something, 20 years at the company. The kind of presence that fills a room without trying. Everyone respected Leonard. He was good at his job, and he knew it, and so did everyone else. About 6 months in, I started noticing things. Discrepancies in how certain client accounts were being managed, small irregularities in how fees were being applied, charges that I couldn't reconcile with the agreements I had been given to review. I was 24. I had been in the industry for 8 months. I told myself I was probably missing something, that there was context I didn't have, that Leonard had 20 years of experience and I had 8 months and I should be careful. But the discrepancies kept appearing, and one afternoon I found something I couldn't explain away. A fee applied to a client account, a retired teacher in her late 60s, that had no basis in her service agreement. $740, applied quarterly, for 2 years. Without documentation, I went to Leonard. I showed him what I'd found. I was careful, non-accusatory. I said I was probably missing something, and could he help me understand? He looked at the screen for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Good catch," he said. "I'll correct it." I watched him, and then I went home that night and I couldn't sleep. Because "I'll correct it," said that quickly, that smoothly, did not sound like a man who had made a mistake. It sounded like a man who had been caught. I spent a week going back through client files I had access to, methodically, quietly. Looking for the same pattern, I found it in 11 accounts. Various amounts, various durations. All of them elderly clients. All of them on fixed or near-fixed incomes. All of them, presumably, less likely to scrutinize their statements closely. I went to compliance. Not to HR, not to Leonard's manager. To compliance, the internal department specifically designed to handle this kind of report. I brought everything I had, the documentation, the accounts, my notes. The investigation took 3 months. Leonard was placed on administrative leave after 2 weeks. At the end of the 3 months, he was terminated. The company notified affected clients and refunded the unauthorized fees. The matter was referred to the SEC. Leonard was charged. He was ultimately found liable, civil rather than criminal, a distinction I didn't fully understand at the time, and barred from working in financial services. He lost his career, his licenses, his standing in an industry he had built his entire identity around. And for 10 years, I believed I had ruined him. Not because what he did wasn't wrong. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But 24-year-old me, sitting in that compliance office, hadn't fully processed what pulling that thread would mean for a human being on the other end of it. I thought about Leonard, more than I should have, at 3 a.m, in the specific way that guilt finds you when everything else is quiet. I had ended a man's career, a man with a family, a mortgage, a life built on 20 years of work. Yes, I had done the right thing. But the right thing and a thing that doesn't cost you sleep are not always the same. I left that firm 2 years after the investigation. I moved to a different city. I built a different career. I tried not to think about Boston. 10 years after the report, I got a LinkedIn message from Leonard's daughter. Her name was Kate. She was, based on her profile about my age, maybe a year younger. She worked in nonprofit fundraising in Seattle. The message was short. She said she had tracked me down after spending a long time trying to find the right words. She said she remembered the name from the investigation documents she had eventually been allowed to see. She said she wanted to tell me something. I stared at the message for a day before I responded. When I did, she replied within an hour. She said, "My father died 2 years ago." She said, "Before he died, he talked about what had happened." She said, "He never blamed you," she said. And this is the part I have read many times since, that in the last years of his life, Leonard had told her that the person who made the report had done the right thing. That he had known, somewhere, that it couldn't go on, that the relief he felt when it stopped had surprised him, that the weight he'd been carrying had been, for years, heavier than the life he'd built on top of it.